Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2016 Examining the Threatscape Ahead webcast. I am Kristen Hinsberger, the Senior Program and Events Manager at ESET North America. Please note this is a live presentation. It is being recorded and will be available following the conclusion of the webcast. For more information on this topic, please check out the Attachments tab. And if you have questions for the presenter during the webcast, you can submit them through the Bright Talk question tab at the top, and we will Q&A sessions. Presenting today's webcast is ESET Senior Security Stephen Cobb. Stephen Cobb has been a CISSP since 1996 and has helped companies large and small to manage their information security with a focus on emerging threats and data privacy issues. And with that, I'd like to welcome Stephen to the webcast, and I'm going to pass it over to him. Hi, Stephen.
Hi there, Kristen, and thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you everybody out there for tuning in today. There's a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to jump right into it. Having said that, I'm clicking next slide, and it's not going to the next slide. Kristen, can you? There we go.
Just moving for you.
Okay, thanks. All right, so this is our agenda, Threatscape 2015, and really, I have to, say this with some regret. It's probably going to be like 2015, only more so. The situation might be a bit different if the Dow had just gone up 1,700 points rather than down 1,700 points. But the year is not off to a good start, and there's no indication really that I can see that the pressure on the CISOs and IT security folks is going to lighten up this year. To the extent possible, I'm gonna try and predict how the landscape might be changing from what it has been. But I'm only going to do what I would call selected predictions. The range of changes, potential changes, is considerable. And I'll talk about some more sources for people to look at later on in the presentation. I'll talk about what tools are going to be important this year, and I'll mention later a new report coming out from ESET on trends for 2016 in greater depth. So first, though, I'd like to ask a question. And if you've not been on one of these before, I don't know the identity of anybody out there, so it's not like we can track your answers. The question which you can respond to, Kristen, I think, is opening up the question now, is how likely is it that your organization will hire additional information security staff in 2016? Is that very likely? Quite likely, not likely, or I don't work for an organization? And people are already voting, which is good. Something to note that if you're watching a recording of this, you can't vote. On the other hand, if you do have colleagues and other employees watch the recording of this, they will be able to see the results. So, wow, there's a lot of votes coming in here. Let me take a look at the results here. Very interesting. 20% say very likely. About 12% say quite likely, but just more than half say it's not likely. And 14% of you don't work for an organization. So interesting. Could be then that whatever is coming up in 2016, you're going to have to face without any more resources. So let's take a look at the themes that I'm going to drill down on a little bit today. As I say, these are 6 themes that I've identified out of many. First of all, I think it's fairly clear that medically related data breaches, which surged in 2015, are putting pressure on insurance companies, healthcare providers, but also we're shining a light on that area. And if you're familiar with the Verizon PHI DBIR report that came out in December, medically related information is leaking from more than just medical entities. The term haxposure is one that I came up with during the year around the hacking team and Ashley Madison hacks, where hackers went beyond simply stealing information, but they exposed the information in an effort to pressure or embarrass the target. And I think that's a trend we may see more of. Ransomware obviously was rampant in 2015, and we saw it expand to more devices and platforms. I think that will continue. Phishing clearly continued to be very effective in 2015. I think we'll see more of that. Real-world Internet of Things vulnerabilities appeared, and I'm going to talk a little bit about where I see that going. I think there are going to be some definite movement in that area. And then the cybersecurity workforce shortage continued in 2015. I think it's going to be a problem in 2016. So let's drill down on some of these. First of all, yes, I think the health-related data breaches will continue. And a couple of things to note here. First of all, and I've spoken at a number of medically related conferences, health IT conferences last year. It's important to grasp that some of the people coming after medical data aren't interested in medicine. There's a huge market out there for any personally identifiable information. We're seeing on the dark markets the ability to for the bad guys to put together fullz, which is a full dossier of data on an individual, can bring economic rewards. Fullz, which have the full range of data and potentially including medical data, go for a lot more money. And so right now, if I'm looking to steal personally identifiable information other than maybe credit card information, the medical area is clearly a ripe one for attack. Unfortunately, the defenses are not as strong in that area as they are in finance or other sectors, particularly like manufacturing. I think there's a general acknowledgement that health IT security is trying to catch up at this point, partly because in the United States, certainly the government pushed a lot of organizations into adopting electronic health records, and those are a prime target. There is, though, in addition to general personally identifiable information theft targeting medical data for name, address, social security number, social identification number, whatever country you're in, organized medical fraud, which clearly feeds off the insurance and ailment-specific aspects of that. We're also seeing it in the States for drug acquisition as well. So this puts pressure on healthcare IT pros at a point where we're actually expanding, in a sense, the attack surface, where mobile health, which is taking healthcare interaction outside of the clinic, outside of the doctor's office, into the home, and I'll be talking about this later this year. In fact, next week I'm talking in Canada at an mHealth conference about this. The attack surface expands when you get into mobile health. And this clearly puts pressure on the protection effort. I also think in that space we'll see audits. The Office of Civil Rights from Department of Health and Human Services is going to be doing more audits, but we're also going to see activity, I think, from the Office of Inspector General there, looking at what in the States is called meaningful use, the use of information and whether the additional use of information that has been paid for by the government is being adequately protected. The FDA, and I'll talk about this again in the Internet of Things space, is looking at activity here, and the Federal Trade Commission. However, while it's possible to get into a lot of technical detail about technical hacks in data breaches, if you look at the surveys that were done last year, one of the biggest problems is still in the healthcare space, devices going missing, being stolen, disappearing, and leading to HIPAA violations, which can prompt audits and fines. So I won't dwell on this slide. It may be a little bit difficult to read, but that's kind of intentional on my part, is to show the depth or the wealth of data available to criminals who engage in cybercrime. At 4 different levels, as you drill down into the data that a clinic or hospital will have on file, you find more and more data to harvest, and that helps account, I think, for the continuing attention this area of the economy receives. Moving to haxposure attacks. I know the world hasn't sort of fallen in love with the term haxposure, but I think it's going to be a topic this year because the availability of hacking as a service and hacking tools has kind of widened the scope here. So, if you go back 10 years, an intelligent company would be a little bit concerned if they had to fire a disgruntled IT employee because that person might have skills which would allow them to do damage to the organization. But if you let somebody go out of shipping and receiving, it wasn't such a concern. Well, today, just about anybody can go and get hacking as a service, whether it's just simple denial of service or something much more intense. And certainly people in an organization who have a beef, whether they're in the organization or outside, have the resources available to them to take that out in the form of this exposing of internal secrets. And I did a webinar about this last year, which you'll be able to find on the Bright Talk portal. If your company is keeping secrets in digital form, you really have to think carefully about this. And ironically, in the case of the hacking team hack, that this was an organization which developed hacking tools and stored vulnerabilities. Well, those were exposed during the hack and actually enabled more hacking. So what does this mean for 2016? It means be very careful about corporate self-awareness. And what do I mean by that? So I think it's important, more important now maybe than a few years ago, for an organization to have situational awareness. It's easy if you're developing a website for your organization to think about the website in terms of the people you're targeting, the personas to whom you're trying to speak, which is fine, and a targeted website can be effective. But if it's on the World Wide Web and it's not gated, it's there for everybody to see. So if you're talking in terms which are not universally admired, you have to think about that. Are you asking as an organization, is there anybody who doesn't like what we do? And in the past, you would think, well, what are their capabilities? I mean, there's been a fairly long history of hacktivism directed against websites, but potentially limited by the ability of people to carry out attacks. Well, that ability is much more widespread now. So who doesn't like us? Are we antagonizing anyone? Are all of our secrets locked down? And where are we standing on incident response? Situational awareness comes from many directions, and it's not evenly divided. Depends on the kind of company you are. These are different areas to look to ask in the organization, hey, how are we doing in the marketplace? What's public perception of the company? Is there anything we need to be concerned about? And one to note there is social media, because I talked to a number of companies who say, well, we don't do social media. We're not really involved in social media. Well, the world is involved in social media, so you really need to know, even if you're not using social media to market your company, you need to know what's going on in social media that relates to your company. Because if there's a growth of disgruntlement in the Twitter sphere around your organization, you need to know about that. And so you need to monitor that. And so moving along, let's talk about something quite different in a way, because it doesn't generally target you based on what your company does. It targets you based on the money you might have, and actually you as a consumer, it targets for money, which is ransomware. Malicious code which holds data ransom. This has sadly proved very profitable for criminals in 2015, which will only encourage them to carry on in 2016. What we saw last year, and on welivesecurity.com, which is where ESET researchers post their findings, there were several postings last year about the expansion of ransomware to mobile devices, to phones, to servers. and also using not just file locking, but in the case of phones, device locking. So, your nightmare scenario there is that you can't get to the information on your phone because somebody's locked it and you can't get it back without money or doing a reboot or refresh of the phone, which brings us to backup, okay? Because this really is the most reliable defense, not only for ransomware, but for a whole bunch of other things. I mean, if you go back 20 years, when we weren't so worried about criminals, backup was center stage for, its protection against other things like physical disasters and so on. You want to make sure that not just your everyday laptops and desktops are regularly backed up, but your devices are backed up. Fortunately, that's easier to do these days with the cloud. But something that I think needs to be said in the ransomware space is that if you've got properly configured anti-malware, this can be very, very effective. It is very effective, and I say this because we here in San Diego we do all of the North American support, and what we see from support calls around ransomware is often that the person had anti-malware, but it wasn't configured in the most protective stance. Maybe it wasn't getting the cloud updates. Maybe it wasn't getting the latest malicious URL updates because that had been turned off. And so I think it's no secret that there are people out there saying that, anti-malware doesn't work and so on. It actually really does work because it isn't just based on static signatures anymore. Any self-respecting anti-malware product today does a whole lot more than static signature recognition. And if it's properly configured, it can be effective. But starting a new year, now's maybe a time to just make sure that all of your devices are protected. A good friend of mine did an audit last year where the internal review indicated that all devices were protected. He went in and did a network audit and found that one entire department had turned off their anti-malware for diagnostic purposes. They were trying out some new software, and the software vendor said, you need to turn off your anti-malware to install this. They didn't turn it back on, and they had spent a fair number of days with no anti-malware protection in that department, even though it was installed and the licenses were paid for. Phishing obviously continued to be, sadly, very effective in 2015, and I just think it will be the attack vector of choice in 2016. Two trends I see here are that broad campaigns will be more realistic. There will still be, I think, attempts to scam people through email where the badly worded, poor grammar approach is used to try and identify gullible people. And all you have to do to learn about that is check welivesecurity.com and David Harley's posts about scams which are taking place through email. But phishing attacks, which are trying to get people to open attachments or go to websites and input protected information, are going to be, I think, more sophisticated in general in broad campaigns where they're just generally phishing. And then in spear phishing and targeted campaigns, I think we're going to see them even more targeted. There are indications that some of the theft of PII is being used to build profiles of people who may be of particular interest to a particular aggressor who's looking to compromise a particular organization, and so they're looking to hone their phishing attacks to make them more effective. Clearly, you need in place just the whole range of anti-phishing capabilities these days, endpoint security suites, which are checking every link people click, or which are constantly updated through the cloud about what is happening in the phishing space, and then end user education. And what we hear year upon year really with end user education, whether it's around phishing or wider security issues, is that, it's not very effective. But if you look at the surveys, you'll find that it's typically underfunded as well. And the saddest situation is people going, oh, well, our user education isn't very effective because they're not putting enough money into it. It conversely has, in a number of studies, been shown to be the best place to spend your money in terms of actual reduction of intrusions and containment of threat. End user education, and if it was a few years ago that you did your last end user education, and people had to be dragged to the meeting, it's, I think, different today. You have to look at it as everybody out there is a computer user, and they all need to know how to secure their systems, their data, and your data. So hopefully we'll see an upswing, later in the year when there's a survey, have you increased your security awareness spending, your security training for employees? The numbers will be up. Unfortunately, despite best efforts, it's going to be true again this year that bad things will still happen. And so the beginning of the year, I think, is a good time to look at your incident response plan. Is it up to date? Is it tested? One of the things we saw in 2015 is both some good responses by compromised companies and some bad responses. And the classic bad response is to say, well, it was a sophisticated nation-state attack, and then several days after that, or several months after that, you have to admit it wasn't a sophisticated nation-state attack. It was something more obvious. The key to incident response, good incident response, seems to be making sure that, first of all, everything in the organization is covered. So, you've put in, probably in the last 12 months, new databases, new programs, new people. Have they all been read into the incident response plan? Does everyone know there is a plan and they have to stick to it? We all have a role, even if that role is no comment, and I can speak directly myself. There are some things I'm allowed to comment on, other things I am not. And, everybody needs to know, if there's something comes over the transom, as it were, if there's some breaking incident, who do you call? Who should speak in response to calls from outside the organization? Who will they speak to? Who won't they speak to? What will they say? You need to have that covered ahead of time, because trying to do an incident response without a plan during an incident, not a good situation to be in. And really, I think we've seen poor responses make breaches worse. It's unfortunate that, news of a breach will probably undermine trust in your brand to some extent. You can reclaim that trust right away, some of it, if your response is good. But what unfortunately will happen is that, the response is not good. So, it didn't happen. It's happened, but it's not that bad. It was a sophisticated attacker. And then you later have to say, well, what we said wasn't true, it wasn't right. We attributed it to people who weren't in fact responsible, and so on. And the classic there has been the JP Morgan Chase attack, in which, originally a sophisticated nation-state attack was put forward as what happened there, when in fact it was people looking for email addresses and customer information for a pump and dump stock scam, which doesn't do anything for your long-term credibility. So here's another polling question. How confident are you that your organization will respond effectively if it suffers a serious security breach in 2016? So again, I can't see who you are. I don't know. This is an anonymous survey. If you want to go ahead and vote, I think Kristen is turning on the voting, and I think we'll all benefit from hearing about your response to this. Are you very confident, quite confident, not confident, or you don't work for an organization? Okay, lots of people voting. The more people who vote, the more statistically significant the results, which is additional incentive to vote out there. Okay, let me take a look at the results. Okay, well, this is good. About 54% say they're quite confident. and that's good. That's really heartening for me to hear that. Unfortunately, 28% are not confident. 11% are very confident and very good. So if I total those up, they've changed slightly. 67% are so yeah, about 2/3 are fairly confident, which is good. So let's move on to real-world Internet of Things vulnerabilities. And hopefully everybody recognizes that Jeep. It's the one from the Wired video about the remote attack through the vehicle entertainment system. And I realized that that whole story was somewhat controversial. In the world of information security research, there's always this ethical dilemma around the revealing of vulnerabilities. If you look closely into vehicle vulnerabilities, though, you'll see that for years, very serious academic research has been pointing out to the automotive industry that these problems existed, and there were numerous demonstrations where the academic researchers did the demonstration in a parking lot wearing a crash helmet, and there was one on 60 Minutes, and that didn't have the effect of doing a live demonstration on a highway where the Jeep nearly got creamed by a tractor-trailer because somebody had remotely turned off the accelerator. So this brought this to the fore, and I think there are implications. And these may look like fairly fluffy things, but they actually could make a big difference to your organization. The Blue Watch, I'm not sure it's blue or pink, download more content. That's a VTech kids smartwatch. All right, and what we saw with the VTech situation in Q4 was that an organization had been accumulating information about users of its products online, interacting with them online. You buy the product, you sign up, you go to the portal, you create an account, you start putting information there, and the company was not protecting it adequately. I mean, it really was pretty bad in terms of security standards, or pretty low in terms of security standards. And first of all, you want to make sure you're not that company, and that if you've got customer accounts set up on the web, that you're doing that securely, SSL and strong passwords, two-factor authentication, I would suggest increasingly. We saw the Hello Barbie doll was Wi-Fi internet connected toy. Again, it was hacked or shown to be hackable, and that didn't help things. Over on the right-hand side, you see a Fitbit. And I recently wrote about a situation involving Fitbit where, and this kind of is a general story here about the deviousness of cyber criminals. It's called warranty fraud, where people buy your product and they register the product. Somebody takes over the account, changes the contact information, the email address, complains that the product is defective, and gets a new product under warranty. So, some of these wearable devices are fairly expensive, over $200, and, I think Brian Krebs probably, as often the case, when reporting crime in cyberspace, started to report on this, and we saw that this had happened at Fitbit. I wrote a story about it because, not to point a finger at Fitbit, and I actually heard from Fitbit in response to the story that they were keen to point out their servers weren't hacked and their device wasn't hacked. What was hacked was their customer accounts, but it wasn't the customer fault, I don't think. If the customer doesn't have strong authentication available, and you're not making strong authentication available, then whose fault is it? And Fitbit has said it will be introducing strong authentication. It is also, and if you're in the consumer product space, this is interesting, they immediately, I think, introduced, when they detected this warranty fraud taking place, introduced fraud detection so that they could spot suspicious activity with account information changes. But we're going to see, I think, increasing interest in from criminals in the Internet of Things. And that brings me to privacy by design, which is, I think, a concept or a set of principles which is going to be resurgent in two senses, in the big data sense and in the Internet of Things sense, where it's going to be increasingly important for organizations as they expand the use of big data and Internet of Things devices to build secure privacy into the system, because it is just expensive and clunky and generally non-preferred, suboptimal to try and bolt on protections for privacy after a product or a system is out there. And so I've just listed out the 7 principles of privacy by design. I'm not going to go through them. There's a good book there, and in the attachments, I've given a link to that. By the way, the attachments tab in BrightTalk is a place you can go to get links to some of the things that I've mentioned today. The principles of privacy by design have been around for about 10 years now, and just to give them added weight, the European Union, as you may be aware, is pushing forward its General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, and they include privacy by design. So by 2018, European countries will be imposing and holding accountable companies to a set of regulations which include privacy by design. And if you're not up to speed on that, maybe ask your compliance department, your legal department about GDPR. And they're probably busy right now with safe harbor issues if you've got business in Europe and customer data coming and going from Europe. But the GDPR is an important part of that, and privacy by design is baked into that. Should be baked into project development and the engineering phase rather than down the road. And during the privacy by design influenced system or product development, you're going to be looking at risk. You're going to be looking at how to manage risk. And just to be clear here, a couple of things to note. Obviously, there's always been these 4 ways to handle risk. You can reduce it by taking appropriate steps. You can accept the risk. The important caveat there, which is one reason I think we're looking at what's going to happen in 2016, is be sure the odds are correct. If you're assessing the risk, you need to be doing it with current information about what actual attacks are happening. Has your risk assessment taken account of warranty fraud attacks? Avoidance. You can choose not to do things. I think Sony, in retrospect, might have decided not to make that movie about that dictator the way it did. And transfer. And this is the one where I think we'll see quite a bit of movement in 2016. Buying insurance. Cyber insurance is definitely on the rise, but I think we'll see premiums rise. We'll see requirements rise. As the insurance industry gets into the cyberspace more seriously, I think a couple of good things will happen. One is they will be working to educate potential clients about cybersecurity. I've been involved in the last 12 months in a couple of things where I've worked with cybersecurity insurance programs who are looking to educate potential customers about security. But also, we're seeing the insurance companies putting requirements on prospective customers. So in order to qualify for coverage, you have to have in place the things that you would be expected to have in place to secure your organization. So going through the cyber insurance approach to handling risk can be very educational, and it can transfer a certain amount of risk. So Our third and final polling question to get some feedback here. Does your organization have difficulty finding suitably qualified candidates for cybersecurity positions? And I'm very interested to know what people think about this. And we'll talk about it a bit more when we've done the voting. So I think Kristen has opened the voting on this. The possible answers are, no, you're not having difficulty. Yes, you are having difficulty. I think a third option might be for some more people online there, we outsource our cybersecurity, or you don't work for an organization. Again, it's anonymous. I don't know who you are when you vote. I'm very interested to know what people are finding out there. Let's see. I'll take a look at the results. Interesting. I'll give you a couple more seconds to vote. I think there's not quite as many votes on this as there were on the last one. Okay, so about 25% say no, they're not having difficulty, and that's good. Oh, gosh, that just jumped to 28%. 37% say yes. Another 20% say we outsource our cybersecurity, which can be a very sound option, particularly for the smaller enterprise, to outsource security. There can be great efficiencies there in terms of leveraging security expertise through a good managed service provider. Okay, well, thanks very much for that, because we're going to talk briefly about the cybersecurity skill shortage. There have been a large number of initiatives in the last few years to try and increase the number of people graduating with cybersecurity knowledge, completing certifications. There's a certain amount of controversy over this 1 million figure that nobody can really find out where it came from in terms of, yes, 1 million unfulfilled security jobs worldwide. This, by the way, is a shot from an infographic that ISACA put out, which is a very responsible organization. And they found that 83% of enterprises currently lack the right skills and human resources to protect their IT assets. And I think, that does indicate there's pressure in this market and difficulty to get people. And I think that, that will continue. Hopefully, it will get better, though, in 2016. A different source, one which was new last year, was Black Hat, the conference, did a survey of attendees, which I found very useful. So hopefully they'll do it again this year. 27% felt that their organization had enough staff. So that's an interesting comparison number there. Clearly, the kind of people who go to Black Hat feel that there's not enough money, not enough staff. And they also feel the need for more skills to do their jobs. 55% said that they themselves could use more training. So this is going to be a big need for organizations in 2016, is to get the training, to continue to hone the skills of people. Different statistic from that same report is, which are of the greatest concern. And topping the list was sophisticated attacks targeting the organization. I think certainly for the larger organization that is the case. Fairly close second was phishing and social network exploits, which I think encompasses the larger realm of the small to medium-sized business, falling prey to things like wire fraud, scams, and so on. Coming in at 21% was accidental data leaks by end users, and I'll have a little bit more to say about end users. As we move forward, which is to give some thought in 2016 to personnel risks. There is a tendency I noticed as I reviewed many of the different predictions for 2016. And by the way, there's a link in the attachments to one of those, which is a review of 25 CISO predictions, which I found very interesting. And several of them, pointed to this insider threat. The emphasis on protecting against advanced persistent threats from the outside, technical threats from the outside, can lead us to overlook the problem from the inside. Every organization today employs people of a higher general computer knowledge than they did 10 years ago. As I mentioned earlier, if somebody left 10 years ago from the IT department, you might be worried about what they could do skill-wise. But now, those skills are very widespread. And although survey after survey shows that in terms of number of attacks, the external threat is higher, the damage from an insider can be significant. And, if you need an argument there, if you're trying to make the case for better monitoring of internal activity, for maybe improved personnel monitoring in an organization, you just have to use one word, which is Snowden. So one motivated insider can defeat massive amount of security. So just let's keep an eye on that in 2016. Something else which I think we need to keep an eye on is authentication. Password-based authentication is just not cutting it. We're seeing that more and more. At some point, I think we'll probably see legal action where somebody tries to establish that password protection is inadequate and it doesn't meet a standard of due care. So as you're moving forward with system design, maybe for new customer interaction and so on, try to work in two-factor authentication. There are some very inexpensive systems out there. A number of services that I use my phone to send me a code. I find that very convenient. I think now, in order to participate in the Apple support forum, I have to put in a code, which, some people would say is going a little too far. But on the other hand, I'm grateful that, my identity is being protected with strong authentication. If it's implemented properly, I think you can present it as a very positive thing for your organization, whether you're doing it for internal use or you're doing it for your customers. But wait, there's more. There's more in this broadcast because in a moment I'm going to take some questions. But also, ESET has been working on Trends 2016, a large document of both review of what went on in terms of our research in 2015 and what we think that means for the future. As I mentioned earlier, I've looked at some themes here, but there are more things to be considered. This is a list of the contents of the document, which should be available later in the week. I think anybody who's on this call will be notified of availability. Internet of Things, ransomware, targeted attacks, and so on. One area that I haven't covered is mobile devices. We continue to see the bad guys experimenting in the mobile space. I know that last year's Verizon DBIR was very dismissive of the mobile device as an attack vector, which I felt kind of did a disservice to security professionals because, right now it's maybe not top of the list, but be aware that, and some of this activity is happening not in the United States, it's happening in other countries, but we do see this trend of malware attacks being tried out in other countries and then turned against the United States. Right now, in fact, I think we've got an update today on WeLiveSecurity.com, the use of the black energy code to mess with, not being the technical term, but to mess with infrastructure organizations, energy companies, taking place in the Ukraine region. But that same kind of attack can be leveraged by somebody, a motivated attacker in the United States. There's a good chapter in there about Windows 10 from my colleague Ari Goretsky, and so I would commend keeping an eye out for that document. Before I take questions, I'll put in one last word. These are what I call the 4 pillars of security. And really, if you've got these 4 properly implemented, you're just in a much better place than if you don't. Proper implementation of backup encryption, anti-malware, and strong authentication will go a long way. And if you're a large, sophisticated organization, you're, undoubtedly aware of this on top of this. But as we work down the pyramid of organizations to the large number of smaller organizations, some of them have not implemented all of these. It's easy to be, distracted by talk of zero-day vulnerabilities and advanced attacks. Most attacks tend to come through channels which can be protected by these 4 pillars. And so with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it back to Kristen for a moment before we get to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a lot of great information in the presentation, and I already see a bunch of questions in the question queue, so that's great. And as a reminder to the rest of you, please enter your questions if you have them on the BrightTalk screen for that Q&A that's in just a few minutes. And for more information on this topic, as Stephen mentioned, please look at the attachments tab at the top. I did get a couple questions that some of the attachments links weren't working. We will update those so you guys have the correct links as well. And now I'm going to leave you with one last polling question, and please feel free to answer this at any point during the remainder of the webcast. So you can request one of the following. You can request contact from ESET sales. You can request a technical demo. You can request a business trial. You can request information on becoming a reseller partner or MSP. Or, of course, you can always request none of the above. So this polling will be open. And now, Stephen, let's look at some of those questions coming in. I want to get to those since we have a lot in there. So I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Okay. So, yes, I do see several people pointed out issues with links to the attachments. And there is actually here a request. Please email us the correct links to the attachments, which I think we can do that, Kristen, right? We can we could probably do that. Yep.
Well, we will make sure
okay, so I apologize about that. The links certainly to I think there are a few links in there to welivesecurity.com. We do have a search function on there which should be able to find those. Interesting question here. It seems U.S. labor statistics predict a 1.5 million gap in skilled workers. This seems to be geared towards higher-level experienced workers rather than entry-level. The question is, how would you address the entry-level shortage, especially for small to medium-sized businesses that don't have resources to hire the highly skilled workers? Wow, that is a good question, and I certainly sympathize with the person who asked the question. I think that from my perspective, looking at certification as the qualification is important to do. There are, I think, solid certifications out there, the CompTIA certifications being an example, where somebody has, maybe they went to college for something other than IT or computer science. Maybe they've graduated from high school. They've got an interest in computer security. They've done certifications. I think that we have a problem, and I'm trying to explore whether this problem is part of what appears as shortage. Communicating our needs as security managers to HR in the job description. So I see a lot of job descriptions which are asking for a 4-year degree in computer science to do a security job which really doesn't require that. So I think, you can potentially hire at the lower end people who maybe have an interest in security, a willingness, if you say, look, I can get you started, but you need to take certification. A commitment to certification, I think, is good. Don't be distracted by the criticism of the various different certifications. There are no perfect certifications out there, and certainly the CISSP certification is one that I think it gets abused by employers and misunderstood. But more technical certifications and things like Security Plus show a motivation, which is significant. And I think you can look at those. Also, A strategy which I've heard from a number of smaller enterprises is groom the people you have. If you've got people in IT already who know the business, you know them, they've expressed an interest in security, put training and into them. You know, consider growing the talent from the inside rather than hiring it from the outside. But also consider the managed service provider approach to security as well. You know, that is, as I mentioned, a way to leverage an expert who's actually providing expertise to a number of companies through the managed service provider arrangement. Good suggestion here, and another question is quarterly security meeting during pizza lunch. This works great. And yes, you know, hopefully everybody does things like this, but I found that security awareness is like customer awareness or customer satisfaction. You know, you always need to refresh and get people excited about security, also about privacy. We have Privacy Day coming up next week. Get people on board with your privacy policies. Okay, with news. Oh, yeah, with all the insider attacks we've seen, would it make sense to have a psychologist professional as part of the security staff? A good friend of mine, Mish Kabay, wrote a paper many years ago about the psychology of computer security and the disgruntled insider. And yes, I think this is very important. Hopefully, in an organization, there's a management structure in which employee happiness and employee attitude is being monitored by managers, whether it's line managers reporting up to, you know, up the chain, whether, you know, it's HR programs looking for people who might be unhappy. A psychological perspective is critical, I think, in evaluating internal security threats. So it's a great question. I work for a non-profit. How would we best protect our clients' information in the event of lost technical, stolen device? Yeah, so this is an mHealth question, and I think what you have to be careful of in the whole, you know, web-based therapy, web-based health program is, what's your provider like? Are they a serious service provider? What's their position on security? You certainly, before you entrust any sensitive information to a third party, need to know what their security policies are, what their practices are. And I mean, this is quite normal in business. I mean, if you're in nonprofit, you might not be aware of this. It's quite normal in business for a company to grill a potential vendor, a part maybe of the call for proposals process. And I, you know, I've seen this years ago, where working for a software company that was trying to get large clients, the software company had to fill out a checklist which said, yes, we have security policies, provide a copy of them. Yes, we have privacy policies. Yes, we do regular training of employees and so on. You know, in a web host, you want a web host who has a real commitment to security, and you have the right to check that, to verify that, and so on. In terms of devices, I think, you know, if it's a mobile device which is on a cellular network, you have the ability to lock that device if it goes missing. You have the ability to wipe that device remotely if it goes missing. You should implement those capabilities. And a tip that I picked up at a conference last year was, and this goes, you know, for every kind of organization, try and have an environment in which an employee loses a device, feels free to let you know, right? So the other side of that is I've heard stories of people who've lost devices. They've lost their company phone, their company tablet, their company laptop, and they're too scared to tell the company for the fear of consequences. And so the capability of the company to remotely reach out to that device and lock it is lost. Certainly in the laptop space, company laptops with sensitive information should be, you know, password, two-factor authentication, biometrically locked and encrypted, so that, you know, if somebody steals it, gets a hold of it, they can't get into the information. And, you know, in health information, encryption on your devices is going to give you not a get out of jail free card, but it's going to give you protection under the HIPAA rules and under some state laws like California laws. Okay, I've just got time, I think, for one more question. Why has nobody been arrested yet for the Ashley Madison or hacking team hacks? And I'll take that as a wider question. What's going on there? Why haven't more people been arrested? I will note that just this week I read that in Turkey, a 26-year-old was sentenced for 334 years in jail for running phishing websites. If you study criminology, you'll find there isn't much evidence to support the idea of strict sentences as a deterrent, although I'm really going to tell a lot of people that somebody got 334 years for doing this. I think we are making some progress. I mean, recently, some people who had been using the Ashley Madison information, the DD4BC group, were arrested. They'd been doing an extortion scam related to Ashley Madison. But the fact is, cybercrime is very difficult to investigate. Attribution is very difficult. It's very hard to build a tight case. It takes more resources than our law enforcement people have at this point. And so, lobby, tell your representatives, we need more money put into law enforcement, more resources. The FBI budget is about $8 billion. That's about the same as TSA. And the FBI is, only a small part of that is actually going to cyber if you look at their priorities and their staff assignments. We need more law enforcement resources into this space because what will work from a criminological point of view is more arrests more quickly. So with that, I will turn it back to Kristen.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for your participation and all those questions. We hope that you found it valuable. As a reminder, you can rate this webcast or share it through your social media channels in your Bright Talk window. And of course, always for more information on ESET endpoint security products, you can go to ESET.com. Thank you, and that concludes our webcast for today.